following exactly as I put it down to you in the email, but let's see how this discussion is moving.
ja hakkame siis äkki peale selle aruteluga ka. Tere tulemast. Õigus. I don't have it, yes. Now, tere tulemast. Hakkame selle aruteluga peale ka. Ma nüüd küll lülitun ümber inglise keelele. Nii oli see välja reklaamitud. Welcome to this debate about greenwashing and how it impacts the green transition. My name is Madis Tilga. I work in the Nordic Council of Ministers. Nice to have you here. I know that there are many competing discussions now also on similar topics, climate environment related topics, but this is of no minor importance as it's very much related to the sustainable future that we actually build. And just a few practicalities, we also have a stream, YouTube stream. You find the link in Facebook, in our webpage, so you can tell your friends who didn't make it here that they can watch or just watch the recording afterwards. We do talk mostly in English here today because we have a guest from Finland and many in the audience do not speak English either. But if you want to pose a question, you want to do it in Estonian, that's perfectly fine. We quickly translate it. So don't take this as a restriction. And your interventions during this conversation will be very welcomed. I only suggest that we first start off, see what our experts have to say, and maybe you already find answer to a question. If not, then of course it's the right time to raise a hand. Yes, to kick off this conversation, I have invited these three knowledgeable ladies to give insights from their field of work. I then start from Annela Anger-Kraavi is probably a name quite known, at least in Estonia, who take interest in climate issues. Her list of credentials is quite extensive, so I just picked some. She's a climate scientist, University of Cambridge, also United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, CEO for Cambridge Trust for New Thinking in Economics. A warm hand of applause. Thank you. And then we have our guest from Finland, Eva Taimisto, who is now leading sustainable business in Milton, sustainable business consultation in Milton, but has previously worked in Stora Enso, which is a big forest company, would say. Yep. So has extensive corporate experience. Warm welcome to her. And then we have Aire Rihe, who is advisor to the management in the Ministry of Climate, and soon, as I understood, becoming directly responsible for green transition process in the ministry. Educational background in economics, but has worked pretty much all the time in environmental sector. has been Estonia's representative in United Nations Environment Programme, initiator and chief negotiator for nature-based solutions resolution in UN. Welcome, Aire. So before the first question, I'll just give this background that I must say this suggestion to have greenwashing as a debate topic in Arvamus Festival came from my colleague Andra. And I was not too enthusiastic in the beginning, but then after having looked into the figures, I realized that, yeah, this is big, and this potentially has bad consequences for the future economy. A study commissioned a few years back by European Commission found that some 50% of green claims that companies make are either misleading or totally unfounded. So that, in turn, of course, creates mistrust, which we can also see is illustrated by another survey. This is in the US, where the younger generation, Generation Z, is not trusting claims, green claims from brands. It's more than 80% do not trust. Well, we obviously have a problem when there is so much mistrust in the economic sector. On the other hand, we see big money flowing into the sector. The asset managers globally are expected to increase their ESG-related assets to more than $30 trillion by a few years time. So this is, if you look at the global GDP, I think last year it was around 100 trillion. And if we see that the asset managers are now playing with roughly a third of that amount, and there might be a whole lot of scam in it, then obviously there is a big problem for the economy. So that, I think, is the kind of point of departure for this discussion. And that brings me to my first question. It is that I think many of us have flown somewhere, had our package delivered, ordered food, and then we see this proud statement that this service, activity, product is CO2 free, right? We don't know, I mean, I often don't know if that actually holds true, but my first question actually, just to clear the ground is, and then starting maybe with Annela, is what do these terms actually mean? When a company says that something is CO2 free, they are CO2 neutral, some even say they are CO2 negative, and some are even CO2 positive. Can you bring some clarity here so that we are right on these concepts?
Does it work? Yep. Thank you, Madis, and I think it's a very, very good question. And it's good to clarify these things. Often people don't know because you can't see what exactly happened, why they claim it. There's no explanation to that. So what's the problem? We're talking about CO2, but we can talk about any greenhouse gas. Let's just recap, take a couple of steps back and see, talk about climate change. What is climate change? So climate change is caused by burning fossil fuels. That's the main cause. So that means that we're taking the fossil fuels are stored under the Earth's surface. That we can talk about coal, lignite, oil shale, oil, natural gas. That is, by the way, green fuel in taxonomy, but it's actually not green. We can talk about that as well. So, and if we take these fuels out and burn them for energy, either move our cars, airplanes, then we add CO2 molecules to the atmosphere. So, and if you add CO2 molecules in the atmosphere, we cause climate change. So that's the invisible problem we have. And why are we causing climate change? The reason is that CO2 molecules have this very good property to trap heat. So if the sun warms the Earth's surface and this warmth as reflected back as long wave radiation, then CO2 molecules trap it and reflect it back. So without CO2 in the atmosphere, the average temperature of the Earth would be minus 18 degrees annually, but it's currently plus 15. So it's a very, very good thing to have it, and it's called greenhouse gas effect. But the problem is that before we started using coal, before the Industrial Revolution, the concentrations were between 260 and 280 particles per million. So you take the water out of the atmosphere, you just count the molecules, and then you count CO2 molecules. Currently it's around 415. So we have increased CO2 molecules in the atmosphere, but that also means they trap more heat, and that means that we have formed the Earth's climate system, and that causes all sorts of problems. More extreme events, more droughts, for example, more storms, more heat waves that we have seen this summer, and that causes damage. It also damages people, damages nature. So it's very briefly. And the property of CO2 molecules is such that if you emit them here, for example, from this tent, we have this light bulbs here, burning this electricity most likely comes from oil shale. So, and for getting this electricity, CO2 is emitted. So these are equally, or more or less equally distributed around the globe. It doesn't matter where you emit those. So what we want to do is to reduce those emissions and stabilize CO2 concentrations in atmosphere. So, and hence you get that when you buy a product, you do care whether for that product, for producing that product, any fossil fuels are burned. So if there's no fossil fuels burned for that product, or even if you take the entire life cycle of that product, no fossil fuels are used, you can say that it's CO2 free. If any CO2 is emitted during the production of that product, and then these emissions are offset, that means that you plant the equal amount of forest that will trap the equal amount of CO2, then you can say it's CO2 neutral. So if then you actually trap more than CO2 molecules than you used for producing the particular product, then you can say it's CO2 negative. If it's a little bit less, it's CO2 positive. So basically what you want to know is the product I'm buying good for the climate system? And is the CO2 there? Is it somehow reduced somewhere else? Or maybe there were no CO2 emissions at all. So you want to be really climate friendly, and this is where it comes from. And I hope I answered the question. It's a very long answer, sorry for that. But
So my question in that sense remains, that was a good explanation of these 4 categories. Would you then say that it's even theoretically possible that there is a product to service that, for example, is carbon negative, carbon positive? Because during the life cycle of the whole production, given the economic model that we have, it might be to... Yeah.
In theory, it's possible.
Yeah.
In theory, everything is possible, more or less everything, isn't it? In practice, it's very, very difficult given the current economic system we have and supply chains.
Yeah.
So having a negative free is very difficult. Negative is easier because then you need to trap more CO2 emissions. But even then, you know, if you say you planted X amount of trees, how certain can you be that these same trees are not affected by climate change and that they will capture CO2? So in practice, it's very, very difficult. In theory, of course, it's possible, given that we have now new technologies coming available. It also depends which product you produce, isn't it? Some products require less CO2, some products are very CO2 intensive to produce.
So would you say that if we see one of those four statements, we should be definitely cautious when they say that it is free, it is positive. If it's offset and they claim it's neutral, it might be right.
But it's the same as if it's positive, probably they're more honest in this case. That means that the product is related to some CO2 emissions. But it's rather like, less offset than it actually emitted CO2 during production process.
Can you bring an example?
If you take a flight, let's say, I'm not going to use, okay, let's take a Ryanair flight, for example, and you offset half of your emissions, then you can say you have a positive flight because you did not offset all emissions, so it's not neutral. Whether you can trust it, it depends how much you trust the company, how much they meet different requirements, reporting, whether they have any standards, greenhouse gas management standards, and so on. And whether then you can trust even that process. And I'm sure Eva knows more about these regulations and related to companies.
Before we continue with how the companies are actually like choosing between their pathways, I'll also put this question of greenwashing to get your sort of definition of what greenwashing is and what type of harm it causes. Annala can start and then I move to Eva. Yeah.
So greenwashing is if you make a claim and it's actually not true. Let's put it very simple. So you make a claim that your product is CO2 neutral. It's actually not, but because we as consumers can't control it. So we trust the producer. And if they actually don't do what they promised to do, or if anything happens during that process, then you end up with the greenwashing. And what it does is that you claim that you emitted less emissions, so therefore you can claim that there's less harm caused by climate change, but actually it's not. It's just there for you to sell your products to those people who care. It's a sort of layman's, probably there's more official definitions.
Yeah. Thank you. Eva, I will move on to you with a little bit same question, but I've come to understand that there are more like delicate types of greenwashing. One, as Annala described, is that you claim something, you're not, so you're lying outright. But often some companies do see ways that, for example, they pick up something in their portfolio that they perform well. But on the other hand, they keep on doing the bad stuff in the background. So it's not outrightly lying, because the thing that they do good is good, it's very fine. But in the backdrop, they keep on doing the ugly thing. So this is more like hidden and delicate ways of greenwashing. You have been in corporate world, continue to be so. Have you come across these issues? I don't know whether in your own company, with your competitors, share something.
Yeah, can you hear me, by the way? Mm-hmm. Yes. In greenwashing lingo, that's called selective disclosures or hidden trade-offs. And what that means is that, as you said, you talk about the things you have in order, and the stuff that you're not ready to talk about, you just don't talk about. And I think when I started in sustainability communications and reporting some 15 years ago, I was benchmarking reports, sustainability reports and websites all day, every day. And I remember back in the days, many international mining companies were talking a lot about community involvement and community investment, like how they support local schools and local football clubs, etc. And they didn't say a word about biodiversity. And we know that open mines they cause nature loss. They have very significant biodiversity impacts, but you couldn't find a word about that in their reports or on their website. So I think that would be an example. It's still happening today, but I think both companies and customers, both B2B and B2C customers, have become more cautious about this, and sort of, I think the level of understanding is higher than it was 15 years ago. So it still happens, but it's a little bit more sophisticated maybe today. Did I answer your question, by the way?
Yes. I was just trying to maybe get some examples also. I mean, you don't have to name a company, but some, yeah. I mean, from internet, we can all look up some great greenwashing cases, but something something more closer to home, let's say.
Yeah. So, yeah, by the way, a hot tip if you're interested in greenwashing, just Google greenwashing awards. They are given every year by different environmental NGOs. You find some interesting cases. You may agree or disagree with them, but they're interesting to look at. I'm not sure, this is not closer to home, sorry to say, but I think a very good greenwashing case that got a lot of publicity was the Qatar Football World Championships back in 2022. They claimed to be carbon neutral, a net zero event, and they used offsetting for that. And then, you know, some NGOs and just consumers were a little bit suspicious about the methodology behind the offsetting. It wasn't gold standard offsetting, and they weren't exactly cutting emissions to start with. And then I think it was a Swiss authority who looked into it and really investigated the whole event and decided that this was actually greenwashing. But what was interesting about this case particularly was that they didn't take into account any of the flights of thousands and thousands of football fans flying to Qatar for the championship. So I think that was a case that got a lot of publicity, and yeah, not my favorite way of communicating about sustainability, let's put it that way.
Just sec, I will also move to IRA and have this like government administration view. How do you see that this causes harm? This greenwashing and the cases, for example, that were brought here?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a very good example of greenwashing. I made it up myself because I don't know how to.
She has a mic here.
Yeah, I should be heard, but you can just check it just in case. But anyways, I can wait. But anyways, the example that I made up was for the reason that when I mentioned that I will be coming to this meeting today, my friends started to ask me not how to avoid greenwashing, but they actually asked me, oh, how to do greenwashing, which was very peculiar for me. So I made up an example. You do greenwashing when you, for example, lipsticks that you have, you know, these hygienic lipsticks. You paint it green, then you make the color a bit light green, and then you say that it has 1% of, for example, algae vetica in it. And then you say, you know, it's very green, it has, you know, environmental stuff in it, and et cetera, et cetera. Actually, it's a pure greenwashing. Another example of greenwashing is at the highest level that I have seen, which is the United Nations Environment Assembly, which is the meeting of all environment ministers of the world. And there we make decisions about the future of the environment globally. And they need to be made by consensus. And what one country, and I can name the country, said there, it was Iran. We were talking about a globally legally binding agreement on plastics because it's a very, very difficult issue and a very important one. And they said that, you know, plastics is not a problem. Plastics is actually the way towards sustainability because it helps us so much. So basically, at the highest level, one country was trying to do greenwashing. So that was quite a problem. But on behalf of the government, I think the most important thing here is that when you do greenwashing, people who care and who want to care, they will move towards these kind of products, which means that real change is not happening, and they might take away revenue from those products that could be actually green, which means that money flows to the wrong places and we don't have actual change in our environment, and that is a serious problem. Another problem is that when people find out about greenwashing, they will not trust those claims, which means that the money that should be going and the actions that should be going towards these kind of things, they will not get done. So when we are doing our sustainable development transition at this moment, and it has a very clear deadline of 2030, then we are moving too slowly and we are not meeting our goals, and these goals are for the society. In a smart, educated and science-based society, sustainability is actually the norm, not the other way around. So we are cheating ourselves, unfortunately. So what we need to do is speak clearly about this problem, not be too strict at the first sight, because someone might make a mistakes, not knowingly. But we also need to address this issue very, 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 very much. I think it's one of the most important issues that we need to deal with in the coming years. And we have two regulations that are dealing with this. One is for the larger companies that will need to prove how they benefit to the society through environmental and climate goals. They need to disclose their revenues related to these goals, and they also need to disclose how much they're not doing. So that's a very, very good motivation for them to move forward. The second one is still in negotiations, but it's a directive of green claims, and that is for the consumers. If anyone says that they are making something green, in the future they will need to prove it very, very strictly, and if they do not prove it, then there will be consequences. So we are moving towards this. I think in 2 years we will be talking all about this issue very much.
Thank you. Very, very brave statement, and also very topical, this green claim. We will come back to that actually. Annela had a comment. Do you still have? Or?
I had an example.
Yeah, good.
I had an example that was close to home. Home means not my actual home, but close to Estonia. There's a company in the capital that claims that they are all their operations are CO2 neutral, and they just flew the entire team over to Italy to work away for a month. So not quite what you. That's the more the example of the hidden greenwashing.
But do you think that in their reports?
I don't know that.
Can they get away with that? Just claiming, for example, that what they mean by operations, and then they say that flights with a team are not included in their operations.
I don't know. We are to see that next year.
Is that about the question of ESG reporting and sort of how detailed and punctual they are, Eva?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So a little bit going back to what Aira said about the regulation that's coming, both the green claims and the corporate sustainability reporting directive, which is upon us very soon. I can see that things are moving forward to a good direction. I mean, the corporate sustainability reporting directive will give more strict guidelines for companies on data points to report on, and those reports need to be third-party verified, and we will start treating sustainability data as seriously as we've been treating financial data, which is great, because up until now, sustainability reporting has been a bit of, some of the forerunners have been really good at it, while others not so much, and it's been very difficult both for investors and consumers and B2B customers to understand the differences between companies. So I see there will be progress for sure. And then I had something else in mind, which I just forgot, sorry.
Yeah. So you were referring to these what was it, corporate sustainable reporting directive.
CSRD.
Yeah, right. But how it, for example, helps customers, for them it's still some claim, they cannot see behind it. So obviously there need to be mechanisms that if the company is claiming something in the report, so you said it's third party audited, but it doesn't apply to all companies, is it? Only the big ones?
Yeah, it will apply for other companies as well, so it will happen in waves, but listed companies come first, and then mid-sized companies next. So maybe just to sort of differentiate between two things. So I think the Sustainability Reporting Directive will bring clarity for comparing companies' overall ESG data and their overall sustainability performance. That will help both investors, analysts, and customers, and if consumers, if you're interested, to compare companies, you know, just their data, basically. That it's calculated in the same way and that they're reporting the right things. They can no longer select themselves which things to report on, as the mining companies used to do 15 years ago when they didn't say a word about biodiversity. Now with the new regulation, they will have to report on all kinds of material things which they cannot define themselves. Great. But then when it comes to consumers and marketing claims and greenwashing, you know, the stuff we see when we go to a supermarket and every washing powder is eco-friendly, you know, there the green claim regulation comes in. And you know, there now it's being discussed in the European Parliament as we speak, but if you look at the proposal by the European Commission, which was issued in March this year, it, as Aira said, it lays out very strict rules for companies for using these claims, and those claims have to be based on science. They also have to be third-party verified. They have to be specific. You can't just say, we are an eco-friendly company. Oh no, you have to say which part of your value chain is eco-friendly, or which part of your product or service is not eco-friendly, but you know, what does it do specifically? And also that information has to be found very close to your product or service, so that consumers don't have to go to Google and spend hours and hours Googling. So again, positive things coming up.
So there will be a lot of regulations coming in to clear out this mess, let's say. Does it also has then apparently it has to have a link to this carbon offsetting? They were mentioning several times here, Annela, and yourself also, that this is most often what companies use when they want to claim that they're carbon neutral. They do the stuff as usual, business as usual, and then they buy credits from some offsetting project in Africa, in Asia, wherever they get the cheapest credits. And that validates, in a way, their green claim. So these offset markets, Aira, how do you, from the government and administration viewpoint, how do you see these voluntarily offset markets are being regulated, and the claims companies make from there are also then covered by the Green Claim Directive, or?
Yes. So I think that. Okay.
Kas see mikker ei hakka vist tööle või? Ei hakka.
Okay. It's a microphone that will not work. But yeah, I think one thing is important here when we talk about terms, and it's very important that we talk about definitions as well. The thing that also Madis mentioned that I did in the United Nations was a resolution on nature-based solutions. And the reason for this resolution was exactly greenwashing, to avoid greenwashing, because a lot of large countries use their words like it's nature-based, etc., but they're actually, you know, destroying nature by taking these nature-based things that they do, and then it actually hinders the development of nature. So we needed to agree upon a definition. Now, in the European Union, the definition for environmentally sustainable has been defined by now. It means that you cause no harm to any of 6 environmental and climate objectives. So that is not only climate, it is climate mitigation, climate reducing CO2, water management and sea management. It is also the protection of biodiversity, and it is circular economy. So there are 6 objectives that go under environmentally sustainable. And these are those that are regulated by this green claims proposal, as well as by this corporate sustainability and disclosure regulation. So you can't do any harm to any of these when you want to say you're environmentally sustainable, and you have to do good to one or several of them. About this offsetting, it's an example perhaps from a different area of work. For example, textiles. Textile sector is the second most polluting sector in the world. And average person in the EU wears in a year 26 kilograms of new textiles. Now, I don't know whether you know or not that to produce 1 kilogram of textiles, you use 3 kilograms of chemicals. I don't know why so many, but it was a miracle for me to understand that. And now there is the question whether these chemicals will stay in Bangladesh or somewhere else, or am I wearing them actually? And what companies, some larger companies do, they say that, you know, when you buy something, they will take these materials back when you have used them, and it is all green. But actually, they are still using these chemicals. So that's a green claim. What we are doing to CO2 offsetting, for many years, the European Commission didn't want to work on this issue because it's a very delicate issue. But now they have presented a regulation for this, and each country will need to set up a system to regulate CO2 offsetting by some kind of a framework or some kind of authorities that will look at the market, which is at this moment it's Wild West, as you have said.
Yep, you have something to add on offsetting part? Wild West being regulated?
Just offsetting. Offsetting is when you find like it's really, really difficult for you to reduce emissions. And then you find another place where it's easier to do and it's cheaper for you. If it's honestly done, there's nothing wrong as long as you still keep reducing your emissions yourself as a company. Or a person also. But it's just the way it's done is like if it's outside for example, in the EU regulatory frameworks, then if it's not, there's no standard or not monitored, not verified, then this can become a problem. Or if it's done at a very bad quality. So there's more stricter regulations, for example, the European emissions trading system, where it's more strictly like monitored, verified, and reported. It starts with reporting, monitoring, reporting, and verifying the system is placed. Voluntary offset that we're talking about here can have these systems if you find a company, like we have Gold Standard, Verra, and others, who can actually do this for you and you pay for them. But there are also many offset where that is not done. And this is why EU now, due to carbon farming, is trying to set up a framework, a standard, EU-wide standard, that makes it easier to create offset, but also that makes possible to trust what is done. So you can report, monitor, and verify those emissions. Monitor, report, and verify. Yeah, that's the MRV is the right order. So this is why this system is being created. This system will be only EU-wide, so you can't trade those offset with other countries. In order to encourage companies to take more action and make it easier for them. But that should not be an excuse for not reducing emissions. That's a danger there. For example, some oil companies are very interested in that scheme now.
But often it is the case because it's much easier, it's much cheaper to offset than actually reduce in business operations. I mean, I just bring this silly example, but yeah, I think it was SAS. They urged me to take on new flights because every flight I take is is carbon neutral, so that they have offset all my footprint. It's like, how this? I mean, this is not possible. This doesn't work in the end. Even if they calculate in a way that I, for example, emit 1 ton CO2, and then they have this project somewhere in Africa. Theoretically, the trees that they plant in some years' time will absorb some amount, but it's theoretical because, I mean, this amount of emissions that I emit with my air travel are already there now in this stock of carbon in the atmosphere, and how much these trees that they planted would actually, over the years, be able to balance that out. I mean, it's so theoretical.
And often these trees actually die and no one takes care of them. That has been an issue. There are examples.
Because otherwise it could be so easy. I mean, there was even a figure put down that how much it would cost to offset the whole. Was a British BP, British Petroleum. Is it? They have a new name now. Yeah. Anyway, they put a price, like how much it would cost that all of their operations would be CO2 neutral, and that wasn't a big sum of money. So it just doesn't sort of work out in my mind.
Yeah, I think consumers and the society at large is becoming more critical towards offsetting. Not to say that there is anything wrong with offsetting if it's done in the right way, using the right methodology. Absolutely yes. But if we have a customer, now my specialty is sustainability communications. That's what I've been doing for more than 15 years. But if we have a customer who comes to Milton for advice for cutting emissions, we won't recommend offsetting. It will be the last resort. It will be the last step on your emissions journey. It won't be the first step by any means, even using the best methodology. So, and when it comes to sustainability communications, I think it's becoming more and more difficult for companies to make these claims that, hey, we're carbon neutral. We've been doing nothing about our direct emissions, but we're offsetting. I don't think that's the future. And when it comes to greenwashing and the problem of greenwashing, which we started with in the beginning, I'm so happy for the Green Claims Directive and the fact that we're talking about these things more and more, like we're doing right here, right now, because, you know, there are companies who are, quote unquote, doing the right thing. They're investing in clean technology, investing in cutting their emissions, and then maybe using a little bit of offsetting where they cannot, you know, cut their emissions effectively for now. But then there are companies who can make exactly the same environmental claims in their communications and marketing without doing that same thing, without making that investment. And it is so unfair for companies. And it's really taking the motivation out from companies for making those investments. And when the business driver for green transition is missing, it's a problem. But again, we see some positive development in here, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I thought I will take it later on, but maybe if we already have spoken so much about this Green Claims Directive, I see that you lay great hopes for this new legislation, both Aira and Eva. I don't know about Annela so much, but a little bit hesitant. But I will then take it now. This Green Claim Directive, in a way, restricts a certain type of language that companies are being able to use. Is it so? So that if, for example, a company says they are eco-friendly, says they that the products are CO2 free or CO2 neutral, so they have to undergo a certain verified procedures, third-party auditing, to be entitled to use these specific words. And I suppose these will be then translated to all like national languages. For me, it's like it certainly a little bit clears and levels the playing ground, but I would think that it's still quite, I mean, creative minds in the companies. They can, you know, invent some new nice words, because you cannot maybe patent in the commission like every word. It will be so restrictive, isn't it? I mean, if I don't know, is there, do you know the list of the terms or words that need verification if you say these? I mean, if just company says that we're green, does it need to be certified? If a company says that we're good, we're climate good, for example. I mean, I'm just throwing in
and
some...
you know what's even funnier, in the beginning when Annela was explaining what carbon negative and carbon positive means, what's even more confusing is that many companies say we are climate positive in their marketing. Ooh. But Aira, do you want to take this one, or do you want me to?
I can try. I can start. Yeah, indeed, it's the same actually for the EU Sustainable Actions Taxonomy, which is for economic sectors. So each economic sector, for example, forestry, agriculture, industry, mining, etc., has its own classification system, and they don't have to use it. But the second you say that you are environmentally sustainable, you will need to use it, and you will need to also invest back the gains that you gather from revenues back to, so to say, eco-friendly activities. It's the same principle for the Green Claims Directive. If you want to say that you are in some ways green, then you will need to prove it. But it's also fair because, for example, we already have the eco-labels. An eco-label on a product states that this product has been sustainably produced, it does no harm to human health, etc. And to get this label, you actually have to go through a verification system. This will just be a higher level or lower level, one can discuss this, but it will be similar to the eco-label, but it will be in a much broader sense. But I think these questions will arise, and I would like to hear, Eva, your answer. Perhaps I am not correct at this moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a proposal that's in the parliament right now, and it's going to be a directive, hopefully, and then it's going to be one day national legislation. So we don't know exactly what the national legislation is going to look like in Estonia or in Finland or in Sweden or in other EU countries. So it's too early to answer that question about the words lists. But just the principle that you have to prove your claims, I think it's a positive advancement. And I also think, you know, for sure, companies will continue to be creative in their marketing communications, but I don't think forerunner companies or ambitious companies are consciously trying to trick and fool consumers or their customers. I think for many companies this will bring relief. I know that because we've actually at Milton we've carried a survey among our customers. We had a Green Claims event this last spring, and we had some 150 customers present, and we asked them, do you think the Green Claims Directive is a threat or an opportunity? And 100% of the respondents said it will be an opportunity. And then we asked them why, and they said because it will set the rules, it will make it clear for everyone how to behave on the market. And it's also a way to protect companies from greenwashing claims when they, you know, how to play the game, more or less. Maybe Milton's customers are forerunners in their field and a little bit more sophisticated in terms of, you know, their sustainability performance, maybe. But I'm not sure if it's a representative survey result. But still, you know, at least our customers are perceiving this in a very positive way.
Annela, what's your take on this specifically Green Claims Directive, but also this Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive? Would they not only help but make it all nice and transparent and trustworthy.
Yeah, hopefully it's a move to that direction, to be transparent and trustworthy. But why it's really important? So a recent IPCC report says that consumers with their behavior can reduce 50 to 70% of CO2 emissions by 2050. So if people change their behavior, choose the products that are carbon neutral or carbon free or consumed less. So in order to choose those products, you have to trust those products, isn't it? That would help this to happen. It is a move to the right direction. So how do I know it's actually the product I buy is CO2 neutral? So that will help, and that means that things will actually happen, not just like I feel I did something and actually, it didn't help.
I just have this proposal. Let's do an instant poll, but just raising your hand. Let's say that these green claim directives in a few years to come, it will be implemented nationally. We have the taxonomy in place. How many of you would trust green claims from companies?
Will there still be offsetting?
Yes, yes. Who will trust the green claims from companies? Raise your hand. There are a few people. Yeah. Raise your hand who will not trust. Maybe a little bit more. And then raise your hand if you just don't care about what they say. You just buy a product that you need and that's fit to your wallet. No one. Okay, I don't know how representative this instant poll was, but it gives kind of at least, let's say, people are hesitant. It is so complicated. These calculations behind. I mean, you brought this example of Verra, which is the biggest carbon credit certifier, is it? Yeah, not provider, certifier. And there are major companies who have clients, and Verra just quite recently had this huge scandal where I think also scientists from Cambridge were involved, where the study, the research showed that it was some 90% of their projects, offset projects, that did not deliver. And this is huge. This is the biggest global certifier. And then, of course, a big row and discussion broke out whether one methodology is better than the other. And then this all, in a way, fades in this discussions between scientists, and the audience is pretty much, left with empty hands, like, come on, just, say something, what's right, what's wrong. So it is very complicated to make up a mind as a consumer with these green claims. Do you agree? Whoever wants to agree or not agree.
I can comment based on an experience from the Ministry of Climate. We created this climate calculator. It's on the web page. If you want to check, for example, which kind of fuel you use when you drive a car, or which kind of electricity you are using, or how you sort your waste, it impacts very clearly the CO2 emissions. And to come to this calculation by the government, it's not official, it's unofficial, etc. All these disclaimers are there, but it's to make it easier for the enterprise. But even there, we needed a year to just discuss these calculations, whether they are correct, whether they're not correct. So it's difficult, but this is where the state needs to come and help a bit. We can make it more trustworthy when we create these kind of tools. At least at some stages, it's validated as a medium. Like, I would say that. I don't know.
Can I offer a completely different perspective on the question? Yes, it's difficult for consumers to understand all of this, but it's also difficult for people in companies who are not sustainability experts or environmental engineers or scientists to understand these things. And I was recently asked if I think greenwashing happens because people, marketing people, want to lie and deceive their customers. They just want to, trick customers. And I have never seen that happen. What I have seen happen is that you have a sales or marketing director who wants to get a product on the market, and there is a rush, and they talk to their marketing colleagues, and they're like, and the sales director says, "Hey, this is so much more sustainable than the competitor's product or service or whatever," and then the marketeer gets creative, and we see the end result on the market. It doesn't happen out of bad will. It's done in good faith many times.
So they just have a hunch that it's good.
Yeah, and also I can see how if you're a sales director in a company and you see what your competition is doing on the market in terms of marketing and communications, and you know for a fact that your product or service is more sustainable, it's produced with renewable energy or whatnot, you get frustrated and you feel like, hey, I gotta tell people, and my message has to be stronger and louder, and I have to come up with stronger words for sustainability to make people believe this. And then, we know what the end result looks like. So this is something I see happening rather than anybody acting out of bad will. But then when I recently said this in a podcast, there was a representative from the Finnish Association of Consumer Protection, and she said, maybe, but there is some direct bad will as well, because if 53% of green claims made in the European market, according to European Commission study, are misleading, it cannot just be a row of accidents. So maybe it's a variety of reasons. I don't know, but just going back to your question, I think it's difficult for everybody.
So in your, you haven't been too long in that consultancy, but what I was about to ask is that, have you had this personal experience that the company comes in, wants to become more sustainable, and then they realize during the process, well, the operations are not maybe that fit with all those goals, and then they, tell you that, can we just make it, somehow look like? Do you have that experience?
I have an experience where a customer has come to me and my colleagues with a proposal for marketing, and we said to them that, hey, I think we need a life cycle assessment to make great marketing communications for you that are safe and future-proof and will protect your brand. And in the beginning, the customer was a bit like, huh? But then they had an internal discussion and came back to us, and they were super happy that we brought up that issue, because we are, in fact, protecting their brand from accusations, from any kind of negative publicity. So I personally think that some level of sustainability knowledge and understanding is a new skill set that all communications and marketing experts need to adopt in the future, or they won't have jobs anymore. And I also think that within companies, sustainability, communications and marketing experts, maybe people from sales and R&D, need to work more closely together going forward. We cannot live in isolation anymore. You cannot do marketing without talking to your sustainability colleagues, at least a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anneli had.
Yeah, I think, just thinking back, at your poll you just started, and the kind of the feeling of mistrust, I think there's a lot of trust building to do. And it's not easy, given the bad experiences. And the basis for that will be education, understanding, teaching consumers to ask the right questions, So, for example, if I say the word or the words life cycle assessment, how many people actually know the meaning of those? Yeah, we can have another poll here. See, no,
Yeah.
we had probably seven, 8 hands coming up here now. It's just like, so you understand, life cycle assessment means that from, throughout the life cycle, throughout the production of a product. That means if you use, for example, steel, the mining of iron ore will be zero emissions, or the transporting this from China to Finland needs to be also checked and carbon, and so on. All little steps in your production need to be meet this criteria, and this is not easy. It's not easy to understand. It's even more difficult to do. But then, education, talking about these things, building trust will be extremely important, I think.
I was about to come to that LCA maybe shortly, but meanwhile, I will ask if you have any questions to Annela, Eva, Aire.
I have problem with offsetting, if you can understand, because I think it's a little bit justifies pollution, that you say I'm going to pollute but I'm going to offset. For example, there's almost impossible to prove that if that forest was planted, it would have been planted anyways without the offsetting or that company, or if the forest burns down, is it counted as carbon emission that that project made instead of offsetting? They only calculate what they plant and then that's it, in my opinion, as much as I know.
Response.
Yeah, we often can verify that, or the companies can, that it was planted. If it survives, it's more difficult. The forest, the trees you were referring to. But offsetting has to meet certain criteria, and as Eva said, it has to be last resort. So you have to do everything to reduce emissions, and they're just a tiny bit you can't do, not yet.
That's the only thing they do. You show everything else.
Yeah.
The last thing is offset, and we're going to do all this offset.
Yeah, because it's easier, and again, the trust is gone because or damaged because of there are bad examples.
But then it's better to show that they are polluting, so they can change themselves.
Be honest.
Be honest at least.
Yeah, but offsetting has to meet certain criteria. There has to be additionality, and there has to be permanence, and these two are really most important, because additionality is that these things need to happen due to deliberate action. It shouldn't happen on its own, and if it happens on its own, if the forest would grow there anyway, or would have been planted anyway, this is not offsetting. It shouldn't qualify. Yeah, then it's wrong, and then it damages trust.
I personally think this is the first example of greenwashing.
Yeah.
Yeah, another question?
Yes, talking about greenwashing and life cycle span. I think also one problem for the consumers is that not even official statistics are trustworthy. Since you mentioned, and it's mentioned always when you talk about this also in media, is flying. And as we know, flying now account for a little bit less than 2% of the CO2 emissions, while, for example, cloud services and computing is almost double, at least 3%, and it's growing. While aviation probably is going down. Now I don't want to defend in any way aviation, but when you then when for example trains and aviation are compared, and then you are only counting what we see, we consumers, we only see the CO2 emissions for the service, not what we should see, and that is material input per service. And then the figures are totally different, because railway is such an old innovation, so you need a lot of iron ore in order, and it's very bad thing, of course, as we know, to dig that out and then transport it to a meltery and then cut trees in the forest in order to put all this steel all around the countries. But this is not accounted for in the official figures at all. In Finland, it was done it's quite a long time ago, by the Ministry of the Environment and MIPS, Material Input per Service research, and it was quite amazing what it showed. And the railway service, they did very poorly actually there. While, for example, flying, because they don't need to have roads, road network all over, just landing, and then the airplane itself is very light, because otherwise it wouldn't fly, while a train has to be very heavy, otherwise it wouldn't stay on the rails. And this is not taken into account at all. But very few people know about it. And it's the same, whatever we have, if it is water, I mean, we know that water in a plastic bottle is not good. It's much better to take it in a glass or at least in this kind of a bottle that you use many times. But this is not taking into account, and I think that nothing is really trustworthy unless you can do it. By the way, in this MIPS research, the poorest and most destroying one in Finland was these new roads that are made for bikers. And the explanation is very easy, because it's so few people that use it compared to other services. I like biking, and I'm not supporting flying very much either, but I would love to have comparable, decent, reliable figures as a consumer.
Yeah. So what would be this sort of universal measure, this unit of sustainability, if we see that CO2 only shows us one side, there is material consumption, the whole LCA with other pollution issues. What is this measure that we should be looking for, so that if you see this, whatever how it's called, type of certificate, then you know that, okay, this is all good, not only climate good, but this is all good. Do we have this universal measure coming up from somewhere?
Yes.
Good.
No, I just wanted to comment about another initiative that we have, and a lot of problems, I agree, are with relation to data. So what we need to do for the consumers as well as for ourselves is the digital sustainability passport that would go with the product. I think it will be there in the future. It's from the European Commission, an initiative that is taking place. Unfortunately, it will take a few years, but I think in the future you will have both the price and the sustainability index on the product, and you can decide based on this. But on the complex issues, I think that the taxonomy and green claims initiatives, they have started this because many of our partners have also said that only CO2 is not enough. They want to see water, they want to see circularity, they want to see pollution and biodiversity protection, and this is what the taxonomy regulation actually brought to us. For example, I will give you an example. It's really difficult. You can have the perfect house with perfect heating and perfect parameters, but when you put it on valuable soil, then it's still doing harm. So you need to even consider these kind of issues. So I agree with Eva that we will need in the future sustainability people who know about digitalization, who know about the environment, who know about economics, and who have this overall life cycle approach in their head for every decision.
Yep.
Can I just throw in a super random comment? You asked if there is a definition for a universally sustainable, overall sustainable solution. And just going back to the example of planes versus trains, we still cannot leave out the social responsibility element either, because if my employer asks me to take a train to travel to a fair in Berlin, it's going to take me several days of my private time and family life, and I think we still have to think about the social elements as well. That was a random comment, but then going back to what Aira said, I think, and to this sort of competence question, I think probably all professions out there need to become more conscious on sustainability issues. We probably need to raise the awareness and information of sustainability, if not in all, then at least most professions that we have in the society. Otherwise, we cannot make the green transition. We don't have the capacity, the competence to do that.
Oli jah, küsimus seal ka. Yeah.
I was very curious about the whole accountability aspect of it, because I mean we've seen that sometimes the offsetting is not as nice as it actually seems. So I was curious if there's any regulations for how long you have to, for example, take accountability, say for a field of forest that you planted, and if biodiversity is taken into account, because I personally am very interested in rewilding. So I was wondering if there's offsetting that is done, for example, by rewilding. Just because, maybe for context, just because just planting something, and I'm sure you all know that just planting something doesn't necessarily do much in terms of carbon sequestration, because the biodiversity that actually sequesters the carbon is simply not there if you just plant a singular
You
tree.
could plant monocultures, like, yeah.
Usually it's planting monocultures, actually, has been so far. So rewilding actually, for additionality, it would probably meet the criteria, depending on the project. But then the requirement of creating close to nature ecosystem, I'm not aware, but I think it sounds like a good idea, but it might be the case, but I'm not just aware of that. But I think it's a very good way of thinking. And before the consumption of steel, life cycle analysis, looking at water, that requires systems thinking. And we have lost over the years systems thinking. People work in silos, they're very specialized, and now climate change is such a complex problem, as Ira said, and that requires a lot of different people, a lot of different skills, a lot of knowledge. So that's what makes it really difficult, isn't it? It's not like, if you're trained as an economist, you can tackle it on your own. And the other issue is the balance, as Eva mentioned, that there's so many of us. By us, I mean people. So you're bound to lose something, either in your own well-being, your economic well-being or social well-being, or then in nature. So where is the right balance is the question also. And I think the train example is very good. In the UK, there was a study more than a couple of years ago now, that actually found per unit of output the most environmentally unfriendly industry was tourism. So you couldn't imagine even that, but it is like the most CO2 intensive, water wasting, and so on. But people don't care. You go to a hotel, you leave your lights on, you wash your hair twice as long, and so on. And then next one comes in next day. The sheets change, new towels, and these need to be washed, ironed, and so on. And per unit of output, it was most CO2 intensive.
I just add on that I have seen minor restoration, rewilding projects. So they're coming, but they're not that big. And I think especially this regenerative agriculture is coming quite strong also in Europe. Now the sort of carbon farming thing, they're trying to work out first to certify how much and how it will actually work, sequestering more carbon into the soils with the help of biodiversity. So there are developments actually. Yeah. When it comes to this regenerative agriculture, for example, Then what I have heard is the difficulties in measuring, because this is not an Excel sheet. This is soil is a living organism. In the handful of soil, as they say, there are more living organisms than there are humans on the planet. And it's very difficult to precisely determine what will happen, what will be the consequences if the weather changes that much. You have a little bit droughts. So it is very complex. So I think they have difficulties there.
This will soon become super academic discussion, so I will try to keep it light. But just want to throw in one example. I mean, I worked in the forest industry for more than 13 years, and the company I worked for was restoring lots and lots of rainforest in Bahia, Brazil, and being able to bring back endangered species such as jaguars to the rainforest, which had disappeared years and years ago. Great work, amazing work. But on the other hand, they also plant eucalyptus trees, which are monocultures. And there are local farmers who say that this land should be used for farming, not for rainforest restoration or for growing eucalyptus trees. So I think also that just the global battle for land and the land use issues that we have in the global south are just so super difficult and so sort of linked to social justice and social responsibility questions, a very difficult sort of balance to strike right. But if you're interested, look up the project that forestry companies have carried out, especially in Brazil and Uruguay. They are so cool, yet from certain angles problematic.
I also have a comment. I want to give some positive or optimism. I'm also working on the soil directive that was presented this year in the summer, and it's all about land use and protecting soil, because you are very true. 25% of biodiversity is actually in soils, and soil is also the largest carbon sink on land. And what I'm mentoring is this initiative that this is a cool project, because one guy made pictures of its garden for 5 years in a row, in every 5 minutes in Estonia, in Hiiumaa. And what he's trying to do, they're trying to create an AI that will now help in other places to develop biodiverse systems that are best for these places, including for reforesting. So I think that these things are coming, and they're coming quite fast.
Yeah, there is a question.
Hi, I'm sorry, I actually have 2 questions. On a practical note, and since we've been talking about trust and everything, I am that consumer who goes out of my way to Google to make sure that I have the confidence in whatever I'm buying, and I do make that extra effort, but I see I'm definitely the minority, not a majority. So any tricks and tips you can share, what you do to do a product check and whether the claims that are being made, if you use any apps, if you have any websites that you can trust. And my second question would be that we already a little bit, you mentioned that in the future, for example, that any materials and anything would have like digital identities or that sort to help, to make greenwashing impossible. But how do we make sure in the future that the technology we use to minimize the greenwashing harm doesn't actually cause more environmental harm? Because if I think about adding a digital identity to every resource, material, and everything, and if how much backlash there is already about computing, energy use, and all that. So, and is it even possible, or is that where we're gonna get stuck? Thank you.
Someone wants to take the question.
If I start and then colleagues fill in, because there were so many questions. Just to be honest, sometimes after a long week at the office and I go to the supermarket, I just don't have the energy. We are human beings, right? And maybe I'm naive, but I still have a certain level of trust on certain eco-labels, such as the EU flower, such as FSC and PEFC for a certification, because I know them, I know how they work. and then, you know, I just buy the same stuff because, you know, there is just a certain amount of time in a person's life. So that would be my trick. Sort of rely on the labels that are transparent and that you can sort of personally audit.
Yeah, if you want to be really on the safe side, just consume as little as possible and reuse things. That's like the safest. Then you know, for sure, and that is most effective also.
That's why I'm taking my research so seriously, because the reason why I'm buying it means that I am actually on my last, that I have made sure that I really need it, and I need to find a product that's gonna last me for 2 decades, 3 decades. That was the idea behind it. Like, how do I identify the one that, you know, is gonna last me a lifetime now?
I don't have an answer to that, but what I can agree is that I just, today in the morning, I also thought about how to be sustainable if I were to be fully sustainable. And the things that I do are the same that you just mentioned. When I buy something, I have a jacket, I didn't bring it here, but it's been for 15 years. It's the first thing that I bought when I was a student and I got some money, and it's still there. I will not show it because my colleagues will know which jacket it is. It's quality. So buy once, but buy quality. So then you can be a bit sustainable. On the digital side, I agree that this issue needs to be tackled. When we were negotiating this issue, then a large part of countries actually, we found it positive to have this digital passport, but many countries found that, you know, it's a threat, and then we will have so many servers, etc., energy consumption. So it needs to be tackled, but I don't think that it should be put on pause because of this, but I think it needs to be acknowledged. I don't know if it was a...
And I think one more thing, super quickly. More and more consumer goods companies are coming up with repairing services. Like, it's a new business model. If you buy a really good quality pot or pan for your home, for example, or sports gear or clothing, I mean, if you buy it from a brand that offers repairing services, hopefully close to you, so that you don't have to send it to India, that's a positive sign. It's not a guarantee, but it's a positive sign for sure.
To add to that, there are more renting coming available also, so you can rent your clothes. You can rent stuff you need at home and then return it, and the company will either reuse it, resell it, or recycle it. But this still hard work, still a long way to go to get there.
Yeah. And here again, I think European Commission comes to help us. They have a requirement for companies that spare parts need to be available for 10 years, was it, after the end of the production, something like that. So it's again, we're relying on the European Commission, and we take the last question, I think.
Well, not a question, just a small comment about this cloud computing and stuff like that. They mentioned it a few times, so I just wanted to mention that there are also changes in that domain as well, like you have new languages that they use less, basically resources. Computers, servers, they become more intelligent, like when they don't get any requests, basically they turn off. Hardware, there was a huge improvement also for that, so it's not like a few years ago, basically. Just that.
Yeah, that's good to know, thanks. Okay, since that was not the question, I take the last question.
Yeah, my question is actually, if maybe it's more ideology, maybe it's more ideal in that sense, what's in my head, but companies have this constant need for growth. They have investors, they're in stock market, they need to grow, they need to make more money. So how does, is there possible to make some sort of ideological switch that growth means also something else than just money? Because I feel as long as we're after money all the time, can we actually be sustainable at the same time?
Yeah, that's of course a very deep question. I didn't want to open that myself. It would be an totally entire, I think, day we can spend on that. But if you want to have quick, company growing on an infinite planet, how much economic growth we can have?
I will start. I think we have a lot of room for reducing resources used. There is an innovation, again, an idea by my colleague who's working on it, and it's a very, very interesting one where they use all of these resources again and again and again, the nutrients, the water, even gas, the air. They have created a unique system that basically is self-preservant, and it's producing both plants as well as both nutrients. And I think we have a large gap that we are not using because we are not thinking in the manner that you just said. We're thinking about the economical terms, but there is a large potential for circularity when you design the systems in a different manner. So without designing systems in a different manner, yes, it will be growth. But when you design them differently, you can also have more money because the system that he designed is designed to make money eventually. So I think that at this moment, the linear economy has such a large gap that we can use actually in the future to reduce use of resources just by creative thinking.
Yeah, I would have probably said the same. I think circular economy is probably the best solution we can bring to the table today. But then maybe just there has been a light switch. This is not answering to your call, but many listed companies in their financial statements and interim reports nowadays don't just report on their revenues and different financial figures, but they also report on their CO2 emissions and diversity numbers and occupational health and safety numbers like accidents. I mean, sustainability reporting has become mainstream also for financial statements, and maybe it's a small switch. Maybe it's a step to the right direction.
Maybe I can say something about looking at sort of larger economic growth. I think that was your question was about. So not a company, but I don't know whether probably everyone knows that probably are companies that don't focus on profits only, or even happy to give up some of the profits they could make. But if we're looking at countries or GDP or sort of general economic growth, we have to be cautious there. If you start suppressing growth just to meet the environmental requirements, then we actually have chosen very slippery path. Because at the moment we need very large amount of investments, and I have a news for you: money comes from economic activity, from companies. So we just have to make the right decisions about investments and not to suppress growth. So if we have made the right decisions, there might be a time when we actually can start suppressing growth, economic growth. And we have to also keep in mind that there are many countries that still need to grow in order to enable decent life quality to their citizens. There's around 100,000 million people still living in absolute poverty and in hunger, so we need to think of that. So I think growth on its own is not bad, depends where this growth comes from, really. You can have a growth, have a growth that actually is good.
Yeah, so just to, I think, now wrap it up, if you don't have anything like final to say, so as I understood, you pointing to the growth from the perspective that if the good things, the good companies are growing, then it should be encouraged and fostered. And luckily enough, we have a lot of regulations coming from at least the European Commission that will tell us which are the companies that are, in a way, entitled to grow. So in that sense, there is light in the tunnel.
And the bad ones should be investing into becoming
Yep.
good. So that was the point.
And we all have agency here. We are all citizens and consumers. There's so much we can do. It's not just everything coming from the European Commission, but just the fact that we're here to talk about greenwashing means that we have some agency and we care.
Okay, thank you very much, Annela, Eva, Aire. Warm applause. Thank you very much for being such an engaging audience with interesting topical questions. See you later somewhere. Thank you.